we are waiting for is to go live because a verdict has been reached in this trial. This, again, is about that former officer who has been charged with manslaughter and attempted first-degree murder in connection with the shooting death of stranded motorist Corey Jones. What we were just showing you is the jury, the gallery is coming into the courtroom. The jury will be coming in. We believe the attorneys are reporting at 9 o'clock. Now, here's what's interesting. The jury was deliberating yesterday after some fiery closing arguments, both by the prosecution and the defense. They didn't quite reach a verdict last night. They were sent home. And at 8 o'clock this morning, they were called back to begin their deliberations. And after about 20 minutes, we found out, it was being reported, but the attorneys for Manraja said the jury reached a verdict. Now the attorneys didn't even have to report until 9 o'clock. So what it appears is that the jury just had to sleep on a decision from last night. Now, as we wait to go live, let's break down what's happening right now. I'm here with Phillip. Phillip, this is huge. I mean, we weren't expecting this to happen, but what does this tell you about the jury coming in right at the start of the morning with a verdict?
I think most likely they had the verdict shored up before they went home yesterday evening. I think that's the best way to kind of speculate as to what was going on. If I'm the defense attorney, the fact that they're coming back so, I would say soon, within the 2 days of deliberations, to already be coming back, I'm a little bit nervous as the defense attorney. Clearly we're dealing with the attempted murder. We're dealing with the manslaughter. I'm definitely nervous about the manslaughter charge right now.
Okay, so let's just explain what the jury was looking at last night. As they're deliberating, they asked to see a couple of things. They asked to see Manraja's reenactment of the crime scene, where after the shooting, he walks around with investigators and talks about his version of what happens, claiming that he acted in self-defense, that Corey Jones had taken out a gun and pointed it at him, and he was merely defending himself. But the jury also wanted to hear this audio compilation of Jones's roadside assistance call. Remember, he was stranded on the side of the road waiting for a tow truck. And while he's on the phone with roadside assistance, you hear the defendant pull up and the interaction between the two. It's a whole question of whether or not the defendant even properly identified himself as an officer. And in this compilation, this audio compilation, there's also Manraja's 911 phone call and the dispatch traffic program as well. And this is really interesting. So the fact that they wanted to listen to what I would argue are the two most important pieces of evidence in this case, what does that tell you?
I think that they are having issues with whether or not Raja properly identified himself. I think that they're listening for anything that they can within that conversation to determine and figure out whether or not Jones would have known that he was an officer, because that's the key issue here, like you're saying. To the extent that Jones just thinks that this is a complete stranger, it's then a little bit more difficult, I think, for the defense to peg Jones as the irrational actor here. Fair?
That's fair. Now, let's see what their options are. So they could find him guilty. Let's say they find him guilty across, okay? They could either find him guilty of the count 1, manslaughter with a firearm, or manslaughter, or culpable negligence. For count 2, either attempted first-degree murder, or attempted second-degree murder, or aggravated assault with a firearm, or assault. It keeps going down lesser and lesser. Right. The fact that they are coming back this quickly, does that tell you something about what their decision? I mean, again, they have a lot of options here. Different areas of law can get pretty complicated.
Right. And, when the jury is handed, so much law, and when you're talking about the different counts between, first degree, second degree, as you go on down the line and then move on to other elements, to the extent within 2 days that they were able to hash all of that out and clearly have come to a decision, that's why I go back to what I started with. I would just be a little bit nervous because it's super complex. It's not like they just went back there, is he guilty, is he not guilty? They had to bore through those elements and determine whether or not, Raja's guilty or not. That leaves me, to believe that when they went back there, probably after just only a little bit of discussion, they were in agreement as to what happened. Right? They were pretty much in agreement as to what happened, what could be proved, what not could be proved. And then it was just a matter of just going through the elements and finding, well, what do we have on this count? What do we have on that count? And it seems like they pretty systematically went through it. I mean, again, 2 days.
There's an argument that if they find him guilty, they might find him guilty of the manslaughter charge, but not the attempted first-degree murder charge. I mean, the defense really put on a good argument yesterday that it's going to be hard to definitively prove that Raja was chasing him with a gun, firing at him, and intending to kill him.
Right.
You know, that yes, you could argue he might have been reckless, and that would be the manslaughter charge, but the attempted first-degree murder charge, which can carry life in prison,
right,
they might not have found him guilty on that. I mean, we're speculating at this point as we wait to go live.
I mean, Jesse, it's an intent crime. When we talk about the attempted murder, as you said, they have to find that, you know, Raja intentionally was trying to kill this man and but for some issue was not able to do so and complete the act. I don't know based upon, and that's probably another reason why they wanted to take a listen to that, you know, like that OnStar call or what have you, to try to determine, you know, was there any animus that was going on within the, like, what's really going on to the point that Raja would develop an intent at some point to want to kill this man. Right. I think for the prosecution, that's going to be the tougher count. Again, going back to the manslaughter counts, as the defense attorney, I'm a little bit nervous.
I didn't hear the jury instructions, but would the jury know that if they find him guilty of the attempted first-degree murder charge, that's a life sentence? Would they know that?
Judges generally are going to keep that out. I mean, I know specifically here in New York, we do not go into what the sentence will be as we're charging the jury.
Decision.
Correct, correct. I mean, that can prejudicially affect the decision one way or the other. I mean, let's imagine they think that, well, you know, this isn't enough time to be given if we were to convict on this. So we're going to convict for the higher count, even though we don't necessarily believe that he's guilty of that. So you never want to bring in what the sentence may be. You just want to focus on what is the law, what has been proven, what's not.
Yeah, I'm getting word that the jury doesn't know the sentence. At least it wasn't in the instruction. And again, the idea that, you know, if you're not a lawyer, if you're not a legal expert, you might think that attempted first-degree murder charge doesn't carry life in prison, that it's not the kind of the same charge as if being found guilty of first-degree murder. So they might be like, oh, you know, that maybe it was attempted first-degree murder, but you don't know. And again, the jury deliberated for about 4.5 hours yesterday, very short time today. If you're just joining us, we have a live feed in the courtroom. We're waiting for court to start up. We know the jury has reached a verdict. We're going to hear it right at the beginning. Now, walk us through what's happening. So in the sense, this is the gallery right here. We see the family of Corey Jones seated right behind the family of Neumann Raja. Now, they're standing up right now. What's going on in their minds?
In nervousness. When you're at this moment.
Okay, I have to jump in. The jury has come in. We're going live to court right now.
I said yesterday, and I'm going to repeat it in a shorter version, that we got 6 people that were plucked out of their normal lives, just sitting at home eating a sandwich one day, and they got a card in the mail that said, you got to come to the courthouse. They're just regular folks just like the rest of us. And they got thrust into this situation. I have no idea what's going to happen right now. I do know one thing. There's going to be one side who's going to be brokenhearted. One side's going to be brokenhearted. We know that for sure. What I ask everybody, and then I follow it up with I'm ordering, that I am respectful that this is the most pressure-packed moment for most people in their entire lives. I don't want to hear a peep. So when the verdict comes in, and to whatever side's brokenhearted, if you don't think you can take it, I need you to step out in the hallway, because there will not be, nobody will run out of this courtroom while I'm taking this verdict. As soon as the 6 jurors are out of the courtroom, you're free to get up, walk out. Please, my job, and I think everybody's picked up on it, how respectful and polite I am to everybody. But when I'm forced to, I bite. I just want peace for these 6 people to get out of here, and then whatever the verdict is, we'll deal with it after they have been excused. Okay. So let's bring in the jury. Here's the note, the juror note. Make it.
Now, I'm going to be the first to say he is probably one of the most respectful, polite judges I've ever seen in a courtroom. but you don't want to get on his bad side. So this is tough. I mean, this is going to be quite the reaction in the courtroom. Everybody has to hold their emotions in, but that is impossible in this kind of case, isn't it?
It's impossible. Even with that warning, I think the judge is just trying to let people know, do not take it to the next level of where we have to have you escorted out of here because you're showing no respect whatsoever to the court. But I think the judge clearly is going to give the family leeway to be emotional. He gets it. You're going to be heartbroken.
I had to cut you off before. What's going on in the minds of the families from both sides?
Stress, anxiety, uncertainty, just any of those feelings that as a human being, when you feel a bit out of control of the situation, I mean, that's it. They have no control in this. You know, the jurors are sitting there, the decision's been made, right? So they're now just kind of a formality, right? Everybody else that's within that courtroom, it's just probably you can cut that tension with a knife. You know, that's just what it feels like on the days that you have these verdicts. You know, the court officers come in, the bailiffs come in because they don't know necessarily, like, are we going to be talking about remand afterwards or are we talking about a full acquittal? And he's just walking out. So,
and this is stressful for the officers in the courtroom. I mean, really, there's times, I haven't seen it a ton, where there's violence that breaks out in a courtroom, but they have to be on guard during the verdict watch more than anything.
No, they have to be ready. I mean, they have to be ready for the reaction from the defendant. They have to be ready for the reaction from the defendant's family, from you know, the victim's family. There's so much, like, emotionally that can go left with respect to that tension that's in the air, that uncertainty, the emotions, the loss. I can't fully articulate it in words.
Yeah. And okay, I think the jury is coming in. Okay, they're in. Let's go live right now. Welcome back, everybody. If you're just joining us, we just got a verdict in the Manraja trial. This former officer has just been found guilty of manslaughter and attempted first-degree murder with a firearm in connection with the shooting death of stranded motorist Corey Jones. We have a feed into the courtroom. We just heard the verdict. We have gotten word that Mr. Raja will be remanded. He will be taken into custody, and he will ultimately be sentenced on April 26th. Phillip, I mean, we're still reeling from this because I don't think a lot of people expected the attempted first-degree murder charge. I think many people thought he would be found guilty of manslaughter. The idea that they found him guilty of attempted first-degree murder, and they wanted to see the night before his reenactment of the crime scene, what happened, the roadside assistance call, and also his 911 phone call. Does this mean that they didn't believe anything he had to say?
Yes.
That's what
Yes,
this means, right?
I mean, it's blatantly showing that he was completely incredible, right? Like, to the extent that he's trying to protect himself, or, you know, to the extent that it's just not whatever it was. The jury took a look at it one last time just to make sure. I think that they had probably already started to come to their decision already, but we're just like, hey, let's take one last listen to what it is that he's saying to see if any of it adds up. Clearly, to them, it didn't. And
you said that they probably made this decision the night before, and today they came in at 8 o'clock. Said they reached a verdict at 8:20. So what was the conversation this morning? You think, like, did anybody change their mind overnight? You know, it's a big decision. You think that's what the conversation was?
No, great speculation. I mean, probably just, are we all good? Because we're about to do this. I mean,
right.
That's probably the extent of it.
Okay, let's talk about what's going to happen to him right now. So he's being taken into custody. What are the next steps for him for the rest of the day? Like, how does this work?
In terms of for Raja?
Raja, what happens?
Well, I think the judge scheduled sentencing for April 26th.
Yes.
So in terms of the rest of the day, I guess he's probably going to go back over to the jail, get booked, you know, start to deal with the like right now, it's like the 5 stages of grief, right? So right as of this moment right now, he's probably somewhere around denial, right? Like, did this even happen? Is this real? Am I dreaming? Once he gets back over to the jail, I think that's when he'll realize, like, no, this is for real.
Yeah.
And, you know, he just is going to get processed, and I guess he's going to have to process it.
You talked about sentencing, April 26th. So here's the thing, right? So he could face, what, 15 years in prison for manslaughter and life in prison for the attempted first-degree murder charge. Is that a guarantee? I mean, what could happen at sentencing? What would sentencing look like in this kind of case? So what would the prosecution do? What would the defense do?
Well, we know on the manslaughters, both with the firearm and without the firearm, he's facing a mandatory minimum of 10, right? So, like, as a defense attorney, I'm always just thinking, like, what's my bottom, right? The bottom is still pretty high. But I think Florida has a provision somewhat kind of like the federal guidelines wherein you can depart from a minimum. I think Florida has a situation where as an attorney you can put forth a motion to try to get the judge to come underneath the minimum, but both in federal court and, it's my understanding in Florida, it's not easy. It's not like it's just going to be granted or that they grant these things just ad hoc all the time.
And as nice as this judge is, doesn't mean it's going to change, his stance on the law.
I mean, Jesse, this judge was clear. Like, I'm nice, but also my kindness is not to be taken advantage of, whether by the, people in the audience or, I don't think that, this particular defendant, especially with the recklessness, right? Especially with the recklessness, I just don't see the judge coming under 10. Let's just be real.
But there's a possibility he could be sentenced to life in prison.
Absolutely. I mean, so then this is where you ask, like, what's the defense attorney doing in this moment? I'm trying to personalize Raja as much as I can and try in my best fashion to explain why this is the most anomalous event that has ever occurred in his life.
Right.
What led to his actions that night? We got to start digging into that deep.
But the prosecution may put on their own evidence that he might have had not a stellar record at times, and that's something that they'd have to risk. I'm curious, as we just came to the conclusion of this trial, where does it stand out for you in terms of other officer-related shootings?
In break, I alluded to the Laquan McDonald situation, right? And you remember in that situation, they didn't come back on the attempted murder, and that's kind of what guided a lot of my intuition that this wasn't going to come back on the attempted murder. I mean, we were talking about with Laquan McDonald, 17 shots, right?
Well, they did find him guilty of second-degree murder, but yeah.
Yeah, but I guess the larger point is to the extent that they couldn't go first in that matter with the 17, I just didn't even think that they could get the attempt here with just the 3, and it was kind of like a chaotic, situation and, really no video of what happened, right? With Laquan, we had the video. Here, we didn't. So without having the video, I thought that would play a little bit more on Raj's end, but as you mentioned when we came back from the break, the jury wasn't buying his reenactment of what happened. So.
Would we have seen the same verdict if there was no roadside assistance call, capturing the voice of Jones and Raja?
I don't know. But
I think the whole case was that.
I can't say one way or the other because the roadside assistance call, it was muffled. I don't know if it was really giving us that much more than if one wasn't there at all. But I do at least think that what it protected Jones from, right? Because Jones cannot speak. It kept the defense in check from taking that encounter outside of, outside of reasonable interpretation of what could happen.
Right. Well, we got a lot to talk about. So let's take a break. When we come back, we have much more to discuss in this trial with an incredible verdict from this morning. We'll be right back. Okay, so that's what the jury heard. That's what the jury wanted to hear one more time before they ultimately rendered their decision, their verdict. And again, the defense made the point that Raja unloaded his weapon all at once. And, once Jones was shot, he still traveled a little while. He still walked a little bit of a distance and then ultimately fell and died. So, it wasn't as if he was chasing him. And it wasn't as if he was a cold-blooded killer out to kill this man. But the jury didn't quite believe that, did they, Phillip?
No, they didn't. And they convicted him accordingly. With their beliefs. I'm still in shock, as I have been since the minute we heard this verdict. But, no, to answer your question, at the end of the day, they did not buy any of that story. If they did, they would have at least been out a little bit longer.
What was the most compelling thing about the roadside assistance call for you?
Raja's anger. Raja's anger, Raja's escalation, it's the first thing we heard. It's just like, hey, how are you? I'm fine. Get your hands up, get your hands. Why? And I think probably the jurors had a lot of those questions too. And even to the extent that the why is answered because Raja saw a gun, again, this is Florida. You didn't come in your uniform with your badge properly, objectively identifying yourself, right? From someone who wouldn't know that you're a cop. So in that respect, to take it to that level, I just find not to be reasonable and to kind of lean a little bit towards reckless.
And the from Corey Jones and the hold on, those statements, what do those mean to you?
Corey's trying to put it together. You think about it. You break down, you're on the phone with OnStar or whatever roadside assistance company you're dealing with. It's 3:15 in the morning. That's already not a good situation to be in. Now some strangers coming up to you yelling, huh? You're just trying to put it all together.
Yeah, and that's the interesting part about that is his statements captured on audio. Such a powerful moment for the prosecution there, and ultimately it worked for their case. But now let's play the next part that the jury wanted to hear, was Manraja's walkthrough with investigators of the crime scene for his version of events, where he is claiming he acted in self-defense. Take a look.
And I didn't think there was anybody in there. And as I got close to the vehicle, and the door swung open, and this guy jumps up, and I immediately got out of the van, and he's like, I'm okay, man. And at which point I said, hey man, police, can I help you? And the second I said police, he jumped back, and I clearly remember him drawing and pointing a gun at me. I saw that silver muzzle, and he had, I can swear on this, he had a Laser Max laser in the guide rod in the gun, and I saw that red light of that Laser Max flashing at me, and I immediately just shouted, drop the gun, and sorry.
Let's do this. Like, take a deep breath. Let's do this. Okay? Do you need a drink?
No.
Okay.
You sure?
Listen, I want you to take your time. Why don't we
You want to walk?
go over
Can
here?
you go over here and show us where you were when this happened?
Absolutely. And
When you got out of the van, which way did you go?
right here, I came right here.
Hold on one second.
Yep.
Come back here.
Yes, sir.
Come back
Yes,
here.
sir.
Go ahead. Now, when you got out of the van, which way did you go?
In front. This is just like how it is.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
I immediately jumped out and I came right here. And at that point, I didn't have what I had on me. The only thing I had on me, because I was in plain, like my gun was still inside, my duty gun, my vest was inside, and the only thing I had was my backup gun, my department-approved backup gun, in a waistband holster inside with a shirt tucked in like this. And I immediately said, "Hey man, police, can I help you?" And at which point, that's when he jumped back, and I saw him draw the gun right at me right after I said the word police, and it was just like, fuck. And it was just, I kind of got like caught with my pants down at that point. And it just immediately, it's like, I apologize. It's just like, your family flashed in front of you, your kids flashed in front of you, and you're just like, fuck, and it's just, and just immediately I drew down. I was like, drop the gun, and he didn't. He was right there. And I remember pulling the trigger, I think 2 to 3 times, and he started running. And as he was running, I had my cell phone, and I dialed. And I still remember putting my code in, and just like this, I had the gun, and I'm keeping an eye on this guy. And I put my code in, dialed 911, and I called dispatch right away because my radio was in the van. And the whole time, I'm like giving him commands, I'm yelling, screaming, I'm like, drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun. And as he's running, he gets about like right, just a little past where the guardrail starts, and he does this number, and I see his whole body spin, and I saw like a flash, a silver flash of like a metallic flash come at me, and in my head, I immediately fucking said, aim, and I was like, aim, and I was like, and I just picked that front sight right in the center mass, and I don't have visual, and I started to walk backwards, and
Well, I think we all have to agree, Phillip, it was a hard case for the defense, right? And look what they had to work through. There was obviously inconsistencies based upon what Raja said in that interview, that walkthrough, and what we heard and what the evidence showed. And they had to even put on a witness to explain that inaccuracies sometimes in these police shootings are not uncommon. But did you think the defense, was there a weakness in their case?
The weakness was Raja's actions. Sometimes your client and what they did is your weakness. But, to get a little bit more specific quickly, I think the contradictions from what Raja was saying in his interview a couple hours after the shooting and what we heard and didn't hear in the roadside assistance call.
Right.
Those were the biggest contradictions that I think just killed his credibility.
And we all know what we're talking about here. The fact that what was the very first statement from Raja to Jones, because it wasn't captured on audio. If it was clearly identified, and he says, I'm Officer Raja, do you need any help? That would have been a different case. Totally
different case. I don't even know if that's indicted.
Really?
I don't even know if that's indicted kind of case. We've seen it, right? Especially down in Florida. We've seen these matters where they're not. So to the extent that he identifies himself, I think we're in a totally different situation.
Okay, more to talk about. Let's take a break, and we'll be right back here on Law and Crime.
I'm Dan Abrams, and this is the Law&Crime Network.
Hey everybody, I'm Jesse Weber, and this is Legal News You Can Use. So you ever watch a soap opera and the issue comes up about the wealthy patriarch not leaving anything in his will to his wife or kids? Well, if you haven't, then clearly you're watching quality television like me, but it gets you thinking. Can you disinherit your spouse or children? Let's start with the kids. In almost all states, you don't have to leave your adult children anything. It's pretty surprising, right? However, this doesn't mean all kids. You usually can't disinherit minor children, and in Louisiana, you not only can't disinherit those under 23, but also those who don't have the mental capacity to take care of themselves. Oh, and of course, this also doesn't include if a court orders you to leave them something, like, say, in a divorce. But if you really want to disinherit your adult children, and remember, don't make that decision lightly, you'll have to make sure you have a will or some kind of estate plan, because if you don't, and you don't have a surviving spouse, guess what? Generally, the law says your stuff is going to your kids. Now, what about your wife or husband? Well, this is where it gets tricky. Most states say you can't intentionally disinherit your spouse unless he or she agrees, usually in a pre- or post-nuptial agreement. Okay, then you're asking, what is your other half entitled to? Depends on the state. Some look at how long you're married, if you had children together, and if there are any assets that need to be probated. Look, this can get complicated and messy, so as with everything, consult with an attorney first. For more legal news you can use, go to lawandcrime.com.
Trisha's having a sleepover tonight. Can I go?
I wonder about Lucy's friends. What should I say? I know you're only 10, but one of these days a friend will offer you a drink. And alcohol at your age can lead to so many things. None of them good.
So can I go to the sleepover?
Lucy, I want you to promise me
I
something.
finished my homework.
Bigger promise. If there's any drinking, I want you to say, "No thanks, not my thing."
Mom.
I promise you. Your real friends won't care. Deal?
Sure.
Really?
I promise, Mom.
They really do hear you.
Did you pack your toothbrush?
For tips on how to start the talk, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov. A public service message from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration.
And welcome back, everybody. We are still reacting to the verdict from this morning that Manraja has been found guilty of manslaughter and attempted first-degree murder with a firearm. He's been taken into custody, and he will be sentenced on April 26th. Right now, we're trying to analyze the jury's decision, how they came to it, and what they ultimately wanted to look at right before they rendered their verdict. And one of the things that they wanted to look at was Manraja's walkthrough, his crime scene reenactment with investigators after the shooting. We played you a part of it before our last break. Let's continue on and play the second half.
My game plan as I was coming from PGA was this. I thought it was a disabled vehicle, so I was going to pull in front of the van, in front of the SUV, and put my flashers on, walk out, and see what's going on, and call out the tag and call a call a tow truck if I needed to get the vehicle removed. I thought it was a broke down vehicle. There was nobody in it.
Okay. And is there a reason why you stopped here instead of pulling up?
Because the guy jumped out.
He jumped out
Exactly.
while you were in the car. He jumped out.
He jumped out, and I immediately jumped out too.
You were dressed exactly like this?
Exactly.
Nothing more, nothing less?
Exactly like this, and I had my holster, which was covered.
It was covered?
It was covered, wasn't it?
When you have your gun in your waistband, is it
No
obvious
ball.
that you're carrying a gun? There's no big bulge?
I have a big stomach, so it kind of overhangs over the holster.
Were you wearing that same hat?
Exactly, just like this. I believe I'm trying to think. It's like I remember he came out and said, "Drop."
But I can't hear you.
Yeah, but hold on.
I'm sorry. I'm thinking. I know when he had the gun pointed at me around the car and everything, I fired. I know that.
Do you remember exactly where he was at when he? And let me go back. You said that you got out, you jumped out, and you came around here. When did the gun come into play, and where did it come from?
See, he jumped out immediately. He said, "I'm okay, man." He said, "I'm okay, I'm okay." And I said, "Hey, man, police, can I help? Can I help you?" And second, I said, I remember.
Don't touch
Oh, okay,
Yeah, don't
exactly.
touch.
I'm not touching
Keep it
anything.
near
No.
it, just don't touch.
I remember clearly seeing this. The gun was right here. I remember seeing it above the door level, and it was in this area right here, pointing at directly at me. And I remember seeing it was a silver gun. I could clearly see the hole of the muzzle, and I could see that Laser Max laser in the guide rod flickering. It was like flickers red on and off. And this is where I grabbed my phone and I started running after him with my gun still pointing in his direction, screaming. And I was on 911. I was yelling. I was like, "Drop the gun! Drop the gun! Drop the gun!" And I was screaming at the top of my lungs.
What was he doing at that point?
He was running, and right when he got about, I think it was, because this is where I started to walk. I remember I was around that area by that pole when I decided to walk back to get my radio again, because this guy was like, "Go get your radio, Raj, go get your radio." And
Just be careful right here.
I'm sorry. And I remember over here is where I was, and he must have been, do you see this plant right here? This big
big
bush?
clump?
Yeah, the big clump. Just where the ditch is right there in front of it, kind of like, he was in that area, and that's when he did the spin. And I was yelling, I was like, "Drop the gun, drop the gun." And I saw him go like this. And I remember saying to myself, "Aim." I still remember, and I was like, "Aim!" And I put that front sight right in his center mass, and I squeezed. I believe 2 rounds.
Okay.
And I saw him drop, at which point, and when he dropped and everything, and I started going up, and I couldn't see him. And I was like, I lost sight of him. And they're like, "Go get your radio, go get your radio." And I started to go, and I was like, just pedaling back and everything. And the guys came, and I was like, "Look, I lost sight of him."
Phillip, I don't know if we've had a chance to talk about this reenactment. So I'm going to ask you the question as if you were a juror, not an attorney. Okay. What do you make of that? What do you make of his statements there?
I don't want to say calculated, right? I want to say, maybe I do want to say calculated.
Maybe it's pre-planned what he said.
Maybe that's why it like initially came to me. I think I do want to say it. Yeah, it's pre-planned. He had about an hour or two to kind of start getting this together. He was still at the scene, right? It just...
Does him saying, "Let me think about this," is that a normal response in somebody in that position? That, it's such a traumatic event. Again, the defense put on evidence to try to say it's a very traumatic event. He's trying to recount details. They might not always be accurate. Or is it somebody who's trying to fit details into his version of what happened?
I mean, you can't say one way or the other. Like, these situations, right, like to the extent when they happen, that adrenaline's pumping, everything's happening so fast, you really do sometimes have to go back in your mind to try to think about what happened, because like when your adrenaline's pumping at that level, what's one of the first things that go out? Your memory, right?
Yeah.
And so in that respect, like the images may just not be there. And to his credit, he may actually be telling the truth. There are things that like he just doesn't remember. However, the issue for him was that he was the one who recklessly elevated that situation to the point where everybody's adrenaline's rushing. And
let me ask you this, and I think I'm a little confused by this. The defense puts an expert on talking about how in traumatic police shootings, it's not uncommon for officers to recount details that are inaccurate. Seems like a pretty good witness, except he never analyzed Manraja or the facts of this case. He spoke about it generally. Why would the defense do that? Did that help their case or hurt their case?
I don't think it helped their case, and I don't know if it hurt their case. What hurt their case, when we go back to like looking at this reenactment, just to be frank, is him, Raja's basically wearing like that Bass Pro hat, the dingy t-shirt, the jeans, the green shoes. Raja, in that respect, if I'm a juror, which is what you asked me, does not look like an officer to me. You understand?
Right.
So when you're asking me about this expert coming on and how would it potentially help the jury, maybe, I guess, if Raja's like in full uniform, or if his badge is out, or if there's some way that he looks like an officer, he looks like he's going fishing.
Yeah, but he was trying to talk about the psychology of why somebody, so we're taking the fact that what he said in that walkthrough doesn't match up to the evidence. But why does that happen? Well, sometimes officers, when they're in these kind of shootings, they don't recount details the right way. It's not intentional. It's just a product of what happens. And again, I'm confused why this expert wouldn't have, looked at this specific case. But let me ask you this in a different question. The idea here that Corey Jones, was the victim. What happens if you reverse it? What happens if same set of facts, same interaction over the roadside assistance call, but Jones kills Raja? What would that trial look like? What would that case look like?
I hate to say this, but I think it wouldn't be an easy case for the defense. You would still have to litigate it hard. However, the fact remains that if they would have found Raja's body, it would have been found wearing what he was wearing. And I think it would have been easy for Corey to take the stand, and to the extent that he was being honest, like, I didn't know who this person was. He pulled up, cut my car off in an unmarked van, jumped out. He had a gun, he's yelling at me. I'm thinking I'm being carjacked. It's 3:15 in the morning. This is not normal. So, it's Florida, right? It's a gun-friendly state. I have a permit for my gun. I wanted to defend myself. I didn't know who this guy was. If he jumps out and he's wearing a uniform, I wouldn't have done it.
And it's a stand your ground state.
It's the stand your ground
retreat.
state. Correct. And like the way that van is cutting him off, it to me, if I'm there at 3:15 in the morning and someone pulls up that quick, cuts me off at the angle, I'm scared. Yeah. I'm scared.
Right. And again, I guess the question is, people that are looking at this, we looked at the Laquan McDonald shooting. There are people out there who look at that and say Laquan McDonald was engaging in illegal behavior that night. But Corey Jones wasn't. He was doing nothing wrong. That's the biggest point, I think, and the jury really seized on that today.
I couldn't have put it better than what you just said.
Yeah,
and that was their weakness. When you were asking me what their weakness is,
right.
The defense's weakness was that Corey was doing nothing wrong, especially in the state of Florida. That gun, he's doing nothing wrong. He has the right to defend himself.
And the gun wasn't even fired, and it was in safety mode. So he couldn't even defend himself. And I think really at the combination of all those factors, it's ultimately what the jury came back with. So everybody, if you're just joining us this morning, the jury did come back and find Nouman Raja guilty of manslaughter, guilty of attempted first degree murder. He has been taken into custody and he will be sentenced on April 26th. He could face a minimum for the manslaughter, 15 years in prison, but with the attempted first-degree murder charge, he could face life in prison. So we have a lot more to discuss with this case and also a brand new case on the network. So we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back.